Welcome to Formed, where each week we navigate a relevant topic or question through honest conversations. We are three pastors with three different backgrounds on staff together at Irving Bible Church in Irving, Texas. We believe we are constantly being formed in the way of Jesus for the sake of the world, and we hope this podcast helps with that. So let's jump into this week's episode of Formed. Welcome back to another week of Formed. And we had to skip a week because Barry.
Yep,
Because
it was all my
Barry.
fault.
All Barry's fault.
All my fault.
We basically walk around here saying because Barry.
Yeah, that's pretty much the way it works around
Something
here.
goes
isn't it?
wrong.
Just blame
Because
Barry.
Barry. Yeah.
I was in Chicago where it was a nice -7 degrees while you were here
Yeah.
hanging out in nice warm Texas. It was cold.
Yeah,
It
that
was cold up
-7
there.
is.
It was brutal.
Did you have snow?
That
there?
hurts.
Little flurries, but not really.
Yeah.
No real.
That's my whole thing with cold
Accumulation.
weather. Like, I don't care if it's cold as long as it looks pretty.
If it snows, you're okay with the cold.
Yeah, if it
-7
snows,
though is
cool.
like that's
It
just
was
painful.
It was painful.
Yeah.
It was
Did you have to
painfully
walk in
cold.
it?
A little bit. Yeah. We stayed at a hotel and then we're at a old beautiful downtown church a couple blocks away. So not a bad walk because you just don't want
Yeah.
to be out in that for very
Yeah.
long.
Well, today we're going to talk about birthdays because Sissy
Someone
had
had one, didn't
I
they?
had a birthday.
one. Sissy, what age did you turn?
I turned 50.
Hey.
Very proud of that. Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah, so I feel like I've had more conversations about getting older, just personally, over the past like few months of, somebody that is on the team I get to work with had a big milestone birthday too. So we've been talking about it and how she's kind of viewing it and all of that. And Sissy obviously turning 50 and Brian turned 50 last year,
Yep.
right? And I think it's a conversation, or at least, so many of us think about when we're like younger as like this like perception or just like thoughts of like getting
Yeah.
older. And then it kind of like shifts when you're getting older and you're hitting these like certain like numbers and birthdays.
Yep.
And it's like, and everybody takes a different approach to birthdays. Like you either like look forward to them or you don't
like
You,
it, yeah.
dread
Yeah,
it. Where are y'all at on that?
Yeah.
I never really thought about a birthday until 2 years ago. I turned 50, so I'm 52 now. And that was like, I feel like the first time I ever really kind of like thought about, wow, this is a kind of a milestone. And part of it was, my dad was in his 50s when he passed away. So there's a little bit of like feeling a bit of that mortality maybe in a way that was different than I had previously. And I didn't sweat it. I really enjoyed it. I had a great birthday. But prior to that, I would say I just never really thought of it. In some ways, I remember for a long time, like I can't wait until I'm in my 40s or whatever, because then you'd sort of be taken seriously or whatever. And I never had one of those until when I hit 50 of like, yeah, I'm sort of moving along in the years.
I'm getting there.
Of course, I was joking with you guys before we started recording. Like, I do definitely feel like the last 6 years, because it was 6 years ago yesterday that I was installed as a senior pastor at IBC, and I've joked since then that I'm aging in dog years. For each year that I've been senior pastor, it's like 7 to my body, because you go back and look at some of those. When there was a picture that we took, a staff picture, not too long before I became senior pastor, and my kids use that aging app, right? The app that like ages you 20 years. And so I have this picture of me from then, aged 20 years, and basically I look like that now.
That's what I mean.
Wait a minute. That's great. Yeah, I think for me, I mean, it's probably been the decade birthdays that I've increasingly thought more about it. Like 50 has been a pretty significant one compared to like when I turned 30 or whatever. But yeah, in between, I don't think so much about it, I think.
Is turning 50 what you thought it would be?
I distinctly remember being 25 and thinking 50 so far away and it's so old. And now I'm 50, and so I was laughing about that because I do really remember thinking like, wow, that's like really old. And I'm like, but now that's me. And so no, it actually it hasn't been. I really have enjoyed turning 50. I think it is. I feel like I'm in a good place. Like I think I finally feel like I'm comfortable in my own skin. And I'm sure there's still, there's clearly more for me to grow in those ways. But all of the things that I would worry about, what do people think about me, and how am I wired, and am I actually doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Like, I just don't have as many of those insecurities as I did, even 10 years ago. And so I feel like, wow, there's like been growth. And so that's really fun for me to see, of like, I see God's hand in my life. And I also think, just because of the way my journey has been, I think about 25-year-old me and what 25-year-old me would think about 50-year-old me. And there's not a single aspect of my life that I think I would have thought about at 25. Like, that would be, this is not how I pictured my life at all. And so that, again, like, just really reminds me of God's faithfulness and God's hand in my life. And what I feel like a call of obedience that I followed. And so I found in the morning of my 50th birthday, I got up extra early. It was almost felt like when you were a kid on Christmas. I got up super early, but I was just journaling and just had this sense of deep gratitude for what God has done in my life, and a sense of excitement. Like, I'm really excited for this next season and anticipating
the next 50.
Yes, I got 50 more in me. We'll see. I don't know.
It's funny because I don't think I recall ever having that sense of like, 50 is old. Like, I don't know. I don't remember having that kind of conscious thought, but I have definitely thought a lot in the last few years about the fact that, so when I joined the team at IBC, it was 18 years ago. And so I was in my kind of early 30s at the time. And Andy was basically my predecessor. Andy was the age that I am now. And so now it's like having all these folks on our staff, Isaac, like yourself, who are the age that I was then. And I'm the age that he, and so just thinking about that kind of dynamic that I had with him at that point, and the dynamic now that I have with you guys. But then also, it really hit me the other day. We had onboarding with 4 new staff members, all of whom are basically the same age as my oldest kid.
Yeah.
And that really hit me of like, oh my gosh, now I'm having people come to work for me that I could totally be their dad, which is just
You're
kinda
referencing
wild.
movies and music, and they're like,
nothing.
No, our comm team, we had lunch together yesterday, and there's 5 of us. There's 2 people that's in the low 20s. There's myself that's mid 30s, and then we have 2 people in 40s. And so we were talking about the decades and what some of the 20, like, what do you know what this is type of thing. I joke around all the time about different movie stars, whatever. I'm like, hey, Simone, do you know who Mel Gibson is? Who? I was like, oh no.
Right.
But okay, so back to the beginning, we talked about how you approach birthdays. I think sometimes, and I've even had a few birthdays for myself on this, of like, you approach a birthday and you kind of get like down and you kind of get in your head about the, like, life is finite, and this is, maybe somebody's listening to this and like, man, that's how I approach every single birthday. I just get really kind of depressed or sad on my birthday. What would be your kind of like thoughts or advice for that person?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, I would say I think it's understandable to feel that way, to feel a sense of sadness. I think a lot of times people feel like my best years are behind me, right? And you have all these great memories, and what's ahead, there may even be some fear about that and all of that. So I think that I can empathize with that. I think that is understandable. To your point, life is finite. So, how much more is there? And yet, I think what I would encourage the person to think about is, how do you shift your perspective from thinking about it in terms of loss to thinking about it in terms of gain? So thinking about, I think about what opportunities have I had, what experiences have I've gotten to be part of, what wisdom have I gained, what learnings, what growth, kind of thinking about what are the things that I've gained. And as you start to think about that, I think there's an opportunity to just really celebrate what God has done in your life, and to be proud of even the work that you've done, maybe in terms of self-awareness and emotional health and things like that. And I think that leads to gratitude, of seeing God's hand in your life, of there is so much that I often just so easily miss, which is, we often talk about that gratitude practice, and it's really a simple thing. But for me, it's been a really profound practice to be able to stop and pause at least once a day to say, there are things I could be grateful for. And so I think, that's kind of what I'd say is shift your perspective, but also to bring that sadness to God. Like, I think God wants us to experience and process those emotions with him, and to have to offer that to him, and to allow him to walk with you in that, and to show you the places where he's with you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I mean, I think there's part of it is like, it's greeting that sadness with compassion, empathy, right?
Yeah.
There is that part of you that feels sad. And so it's okay even to name that. It was just, I was with this group of pastors this last week, and we were processing through some of the heavy things we bear and some of the pain that we've experienced, and kind of being prompted to that idea of like, say hello to that anger, say hello to that shame, say hello to that sadness. In other words, like, welcome it, allow it to come out of hiding, and say it's okay. It's understandable why you'd feel it. But then I think there's a place to get inquisitive, of like, okay, what's underneath? What's underneath that? And that's what begins to, I think, open us up then to the possibility of both gratitude for what we have experienced, and then even some sense of expectation, anticipation for the future, what lies ahead, what this means now that I've arrived at this particular junction in my life, what God still has in store for me. But yeah, I think just a place of meeting that sadness with empathy and compassion.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of answered this with your answer there, but does your approach to getting older change if you're a Christian?
I think it does. Can I just touch on one thing you said before? Because I think I hadn't thought about it in that way, but curiosity is a really good response to that. Because to think about, what am I believing that maybe I need to bring before God, right? Well, maybe there's lies I'm believing about aging or about myself. And so I really like what you're talking about there, of like asking, well, what's underneath that? So
where what we often do is we feel that way, and it's like, I shouldn't feel that way, and I'm like, I'm gonna deny it, I'm gonna suppress it, I'm gonna shame myself in some sense for feeling that way, but rather like, no, that's there. It's okay, it's understandable that that's there, but why is it there? What's going on underneath that? To begin to get inquisitive about it.
That's really good. All right, so sorry. You said what?
No, I mean,
you kind of Christian.
Yeah, you basically answered it, but it's like, does it change your approach to getting older if you're a believer?
I think it does, because I think there's that verse in 1 Corinthians 15 where Paul says, "If only for this life we are to have hope in Christ, then all people are to be pitied." That for the Christian, we have this hope that this is not all there is. There is this life to come. That the brokenness and the suffering and the sadness and death, all of that, there will be this day when Jesus will return and he will right every wrong. He will set all things right. And so for the Christian, the best is always yet to come, right? Our best days are not behind us. For the Christian, the best days are ahead of us. And so I think in that sense, we have a hope that can't be taken away from us.
I think about, Paul's words about, where he talks about these light and momentary afflictions compared to the eternal weight of glory. And we may have talked about this on the podcast before. I remember for a long time, I actually sort of resented that verse, right? Like, how dare you call my suffering light and momentary? Because this feels heavy. And it feels like it's not going away, right? And yet part of what Paul is doing there is not diminishing the reality of pain and suffering in this life, because Paul himself was very familiar with pain and suffering. He's not diminishing its horrendous reality, but he's just saying, as bad as that is, it's small compared to this great glory that awaits us still. And so having that kind of perspective certainly, I think, should shape the way that we experience our own aging process and the reality of our mortality. That the ancient spirituality has this tradition of memento mori, and you find it in Stoic philosophy and other places. But the Christian practice of remember the reality that you're going to die, and you'll see paintings from the medieval period in particular, where a saint or a sage has a skull on their desk or on the table. In the painting, and that is just that reminder, like, I'm going to die, and the it's not some sort of morbid preoccupation with one's own death. It's just remembering to make the most out of life, right? Remembering to make the most out of this day. And so I think for us as Christians, there's that reality of like every day is a gift from God. Make the most of this day. Every day we're growing one day closer to the reality of our death. Make the most of this day and cling to the hope that is beyond the grave for this great glory that yet awaits us.
Yeah, it's not that this isn't bad. It's look how good this is going to be. Consider, we know the end of the story.
Yeah. Speaking of the story, we go back in the story to biblical times.
That was a good transition. I mean, I have to point that out. That was.
I feel like there's a lot of times, especially in the Old Testament, you see all the, you see names, you see these big age numbers thrown out, and it's like, wow, how I don't see anybody living, to that number on the page there. So let's just throw it out there. Why did people live so long?
So I think first we have to just acknowledge the Bible doesn't clearly explain the reason, right? So we see this, these names and these ages, and the Bible, like we can't sort of step outside of the story to then get commentary on the story within the Bible itself. We can offer some reflection, speculation, but part of what I think we have to note is where those ages and names fall, and they particularly fall within the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis. Now, Genesis 12 is a hinge point in the entire biblical narrative because it's Genesis 12 where God selects Abraham and his descendants as the means through which he's going to move forward his rescue mission in the world. So the history of God's redemptive purposes really takes on a whole new dynamic after Genesis 12. If you look back at everything before Genesis 11, it's oftentimes referred to as what's called theological history. And that doesn't mean that it's not historical, but it does mean there's something even more than historical going on, that it really is a kind of theological account of everything that happened in the history of the world prior to Abraham. And so what you find is that's where these long lifespans come in, particularly close to the beginning of the account of humanity, the beginning of the account of creation. And so it's this sense of this was what God intended for humanity from the very beginning, a long, full, in fact, even eternal life. But we see the consequences of sin, and interestingly enough, where that lifespan declines is actually after the flood, after the account of Noah and his family. And so you're seeing more and more the whole way that theological history progresses is from creation, the way things were supposed to be, through this sort of downward spiral of the effects of sin, ultimately leading to this hinge point. What's God going to do in response to the ongoing consequences of sin? And the answer to that is, first off, Abraham and his family, and then through you, all nations of the earth will be blessed. Ultimately, the promise that's fulfilled in Jesus. So in some sense, those long age spans connects us back to God's intention at creation and really points ahead then to the promise of new creation when we, in fact, will live forever because of the work that Jesus has done on our behalf.
Yeah. I mean,
Follow that up.
I don't know if I can. That's why I asked Barry to go first.
Dr. Jones just went into his element right there.
Yeah, that was Dr. Jones. That's pretty good. Yeah, he's got better material, but that is among his top. I mean, I would echo the same thing. I would say that one, we actually don't really know, but Adam and Eve were created to live eternally, and so you do see lifespan shorten after the flood, and some of that could just be that after the fall, sin and death leads to death, and as a result, degenerating disease, all of those processes take time. And what I love is you do see the hinge point at Genesis 12, where God gives us a way. Like, here's my plan for all of humanity, to rescue all of humanity. So even though you see the effects of sin and death in this really significant way in terms of chronological age, you see God providing us with a plan of salvation.
Does the Bible say anything about celebrating birthdays? Or like birthdays in
So
general?
I haven't found where the Bible speaks directly to birthdays and celebrating birthdays necessarily. Dr. Jones might have a different take on that. But I do think there's a lot of biblical principles that we can apply to celebrating birthdays. So the principles of honoring God, of gratitude, of celebration. Like I often think it's funny when people think that God is sort of this stuffy, like fire and brimstone kind of God, and where I see God is he's commanding his people to celebrate. That he actually says, like, no, you must do this, you must celebrate. And so I think, of course, we can do this at all times, and we should give thanks for what God has given us in all the days of our lives and in all moments of our lives. But there is something, I think, significant and in markers like birthdays where we could pause and see, here's what God has done in my life, and let me thank him for that. Let me celebrate that. Let me honor him for that. And so I do think those principles sort of apply to birthdays.
You missed that reference to birthdays in Obadiah, huh?
See, I knew it.
No,
I knew it.
No. I don't. I'm
knew
not
he was
aware.
gonna have-
I'm not aware of particular biblical references to birthdays. So it doesn't seem to be, at least in the account of Scripture, something that is really emphasized. But I love what Sissy said about, we do get the idea from the people of God, from the way God forms people spiritually, is this idea of remembrance and celebration. The celebration is part of the remembrance. So we are people formed by memory through communal embodied celebration. And so that's a principle that we carry on even as we think about the ways in which we follow the liturgical calendar, the ways in which we practice corporate worship. All of that is a part of a people formed by rhythms of remembrance through these kind of communal embodied rituals. So birthdays is for us a kind of a culturally significant way in which we engage that, not necessarily a biblical one, and yet I think we can find that this is something that can be, for us, meaningful, an opportunity when the calendar rolls around on our lives to look back and remember God's faithfulness.
That's good.
All right, I have a personal question. What's something you didn't believe about getting older, but then you got older? You got older, and let's say you could take it either way. It's like, all right, something I thought, and then it actually did come true. That, man, that was true. Or, man, I thought this about getting older, and then I got a little older, and I was like, I don't know if that is true. Kind of a weird question, but
no, I think I thought of two things. One was I touched on this earlier. I always thought that getting older, this wouldn't be a good season of life. Like, it was all downhill. And I don't think that's true. And I don't know if that's just because I've arrived at it and so I don't want it to be true, but I really don't believe that's true. I really believe, like, these are my best years. They're still to come. And I feel like I've just grown in significant ways. And if God has done that in these 50 years, what does he have for me next? Or what are ways that he wants to grow me and shape me and form me to be more like Jesus? And so there's a sense of joy that I didn't think I would have. Like, I really am excited about what God has for me. And so I wasn't expecting that. And then secondly, I just thought I'd have a lot more of life figured out by now. And that's just not true.
Yep.
And it's just such a good reminder to me that every season of life, every stage of life, there are challenges and complexities that it really forces us to say, I need God. Like, I need to depend on God in different ways for different things than I did when I was maybe 25 than I do today. But I still need God as much because I don't have any of it figured out.
No, I was thinking along the same lines. So the first thought for me, even as I was thinking about it earlier today, my neck and shoulders are really bothering me. I slept wrong, and I think I slept wrong like last Tuesday night,
and it's still
bothering me.
That is
and
true.
So just the reality of, your body ages, and so when you're younger, you're not thinking about that a whole lot. You're not conscious of it, the limitations of your body nearly as much. And you just have the reality of that confront you, as you start to get older. But there is something to the idea, right? Like, you think about it when you're a kid. Your 10-year-old self looks back at your 7-year-old self, thinks, boy, that 7-year-old didn't know nothing, right? And then your 15-year-old self looks back at your 10-year-old self, and that 10-year-old didn't know nothing. Your 20-year-old self looks back the same way at your 10-year-old self, didn't know nothing. 30 years looks back at 20, that didn't know nothing. So at 50, you start to realize, I'm now 50 and I don't know nothing, right? It's not actually looking back. It's like, and I kind of can't help but think it's actually at that point, right, when you recognize, there's a whole lot that I don't know.
Yeah.
That you actually start to know things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, so there is that sense of perspective that you gain over time. I think in terms of what I anticipated more, similar to kind of what you were saying, is, boy, I thought as you got older, all of those old insecurities just some point just go
disappear.
away. All of those struggles just are gonna be gone.
Yeah.
At some point you age out of struggles and insecurities, right? Surely you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And then you
Then
get
you're
older
like,
and you
nope.
realize, you know what?
What's that age?
Maybe I've made some progress on
Yeah.
some of those
there's-
things,
yeah.
and yet some of those things still follow me.
Yeah.
And it's a lifelong process.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I can answer this question, and people be yelling at me no, this guy in his 30s. I will say this is the first time, like over the past few years, like it's some of the small things for me of like in the like early 20s, you thought you're like invincible.
Yeah.
Of just like
Oh yeah.
go out and play basketball
right.
for
Yeah.
hours on hours or
Yeah.
stay up all night.
Right.
and
Nothing hurt,
The
yeah.
all-nighters I would pull, it's just like nothing.
Yep.
And now I can't imagine.
Not so much.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Not so
Yeah.
much.
But we were actually a few days ago, Barb was pointing at the different gray hairs that were coming in on the side here. I'm like, wow, I'm reaching that point. I got some catching up to you.
That's right. That's right.
All right, let's do some fun banter here at the end. It's a this or that birthday edition game.
Oh boy.
So it's real simple. I'll give you two options, and you pick which one for your birthday, what you prefer.
Okay.
Cake or ice cream?
Ice cream. Easy.
That was cool.
I really love
I
the
love ice
combo. I really love
Ooh,
the combo.
That's
So,
pretty good.
yeah.
Combo.
But you're making me choose this or that. I'll probably go with ice cream.
Okay.
But the combo.
Yeah.
Are y'all an icing fan on cake?
My wife, Kim loves icing.
Really?
When we got
Any
married.
kind?
Yeah, we got married. I didn't actually get any cake at the reception except for that piece that you like shove in each other's face. So we got home from the honeymoon, and I'd gone to work and came home from work. This was like within a day or two of getting home from the honeymoon, and we had a piece, like a big portion of the cake, in the fridge. And so I go pull that thing out, and I'm pulling the wrapping off of it to get in there. She has eaten all the frosting all over the top and gotten between the layers and eaten the frosting.
Even in
Oh,
between.
So,
wow.
yeah.
Really
and so
likes-
this is like, we're days into being married. It's like,
Yeah.
what have I gotten myself
Yeah.
into?
All you got is cake.
She's definitely a frosting person. And then, my middle kid especially could eat it with a spoon. So I like the whole experience.
Yes. So do I.
Okay.
The right proportions.
I'll just eat the cake, not the
Well,
icing.
you and Kim would be
Yeah, Kim
compatible
will-
in that
Kim will
regard, because
pick
I
your-
have oftentimes just eaten the cake because there's no icing left.
Okay. Big birthday party with friends or an experience?
I think an experience.
Okay. I know
Yeah.
Barry's answer.
I take the experience.
Barry's
like,
like
people?
an experience by myself.
For my 50th,
the
I had a
mumps.
great experience.
Yeah.
It was with friends, but it was a
Yes.
small group
Smaller.
of friends. It was, 6 guys or something like that.
Yeah.
7 guys maybe. And fire pits, smoked cigars, barbecue. It was fantastic. It was really great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That's kind of my thing too. Too many people is like really overwhelming to me, and
I know.
I feel like I got to make everybody happy, and I don't like to.
So
do that.
experience over that.
Yeah, experience.
A gift or a fancy meal?
Fancy meal.
Give me the meal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't depend on what the gift is.
Well,
That's in the same range,
yeah, I don't. The meal is like where I'd go.
Yeah.
Again, it's like
Yeah.
experience meal. Like to me,
Yeah.
that's better than a gift.
Okay.
There aren't that many gifts that
That
I
I
feel
like, yeah.
I mean,
Like, are you gonna give me a car? I mean,
Car or meal.
my grandfather used to have this saying around Christmas or birthday or whatever. He'd say, all I need are a few kind words and a few well wishes. And I've always just kind of had that
Yeah.
mentality around, like, I'm grateful for your gifts, but
Sure.
you don't need to get me anything.
Yeah.
Like, but boy, I would definitely go for a meal. And again, that doesn't mean I don't love a good
yeah,
gift.
yeah,
but
I
yeah.
agree.
yeah, I'd go for the meal.
Teenager or adult?
Oh, well, what's it?
what are-
What's
what are we
context?
getting at?
So I got this from our youth had a night the other night, mental health night, and the brainstorming thing before, or it was a question. It was like, would you, for all the youth in the room, would you rather stay a teenager forever or fast forward to be an adult? And the room was kind of split on it.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny.
Yeah.
But it made me think about it for this. I'm like, all right, if you could just stay a teenager forever with all the things included, like no
Right.
bills,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
or an adult.
Adult.
Is it for sure an adult?
All the angst of
Yeah.
teenage years.
Yeah.
is
I mean,
just-
I talked about you think the struggles and insecurities are going to go away. They don't go away,
Yeah.
but they're probably better now than they
Right.
were then.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm with you. I would choose the adult. All right, this one's not a this or that. It's just the last question. Best decade.
Best decade. Wow.
I'm going to look to the future and say my 50s are going to be my best decade. Yeah.
Let's go.
You know, I really have had a sense that there's some really rich stuff that lies ahead in this season of my life. So I have a great anticipation about the decades of the
Yeah.
50s, and I've had others that are even a little further along tell me like that's often the most kind of fruitful
Yeah.
decade of your life in ministry. And so I anticipate some good things ahead. We had a great 30s. 30s were awesome. It was also a time of like just the struggle of little kids, of not having any money. Like 30s were filled with some significant challenges, but also really rich. But yeah, I'm anticipating a good decade lying ahead.
See, I had the money in the 30s, and I don't have the money in my 50s, so I don't know. But
Sissy
we're
went
going to be
reverse.
okay with it.
We were so broke.
All right, that's the last question. This is the episode on getting older. This is the one that applies to literally everybody.
Yeah.
So
That's true. We're all getting older.
everybody is listening. You have to get older at some point. So, all right, we'll be back next week with another week of Formed.